Hey, what's up? This is Gardetrace. Last year I did a ranking of the movies I saw in 2018, so it only made sense that I would make a ranking of 2019's movies as well. 2018 was a year I went to see a lot of movies, with me seeing 11, but I saw even more movies in 2019, with me seeing 16. So I got a lot of movies to talk about, and just like last year, I'll be making a list to rank them from worst to best. Of course, this is my list, not yours. If you don't like it, make your own list. Also, keep in mind that only movies I've seen are on this list. If a movie you saw didn't make the list, I didn't see it. And unlike the 2018 list, where I only ranked movies I saw in theaters, this list will feature movies I saw in either theaters or on Blu-ray or DVD. This video will be mostly spoiler free, and I'll try to keep things brief so this video won't be nearly as long as last year's because, damn. Anyway, let's get on with it. At the bottom of the barrel, the movie ranked 16th, and the worst movie of 2019 is Captain Marvel. This movie was boring as shit. It was a disappointment in every way imaginable. First of all, Brie Larson is greatly miscast in this movie. She just doesn't fit the part, and her acting is stiff as fuck. As for Captain Marvel herself, she's a total fucking Mary Sue. She's your standard strong female character whose only traits are being female and being strong. She has no personality, no emotions, no struggles, and no flaws to overcome. She is a feminist, wish fulfillment character. And in order to look good, she makes others look bad, like Nick Fury. Although Samuel L. Jackson tries, this movie ruins Nick Fury and drains any sense of mystique he had. And fuck this movie's reveal on how he lost his eye. Also, this movie is the most visually dull movie of the MCU. All the action sequences are boring. They even managed to make a train fight boring. Also, the main antagonist just plain sucks, and even though Ben Mendelsohn plays his part well, I don't care for the Skrull plot twist, and the way this movie ties into the continuity is the biggest slap in the face for the entire MCU. We should have gotten Black Widow last year instead of this piece of shit movie. As the second biggest loser, ranking in at number 15 is Dark Phoenix. This is one of the few movies I didn't see in theaters. I got it on Blu-ray. What a waste of money it was. I heard the bad reviews, but I wanted to see it for myself, and it was really bad. But it didn't have to be. We barely got to know any of the characters we were introduced to in X-Men Apocalypse, and that includes Jean Grey herself. Without getting the chance to get to know these characters, an emotionally driven story like the Dark Phoenix saga, where Jean Grey becomes evil due to a cosmic force and turns on her friends and allies, just falls flat. This movie doesn't learn a damn thing from the mistakes of how characters were managed in past X-Men movies, and in some ways, it's even worse. Also, this movie's antagonist is dull as fuck. She has to be the most boring, vapid, forgettable antagonist ever. This movie does have a few good action scenes, but they're not enough to elevate the film. This movie was a very disappointing way to end the X-Men film series. They had a second chance to do the Dark Phoenix saga justice after fucking it up in X-Men The Last Stand, but they failed miserably. Also, fuck Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique, her design sucks, she's a total bitch, and I'm glad she got what she got in this movie. Ranking at number 14 is Toy Story 4. As someone who really liked Toy Story 3 and thought it was the perfect send-off for the series, I was very disappointed to learn they were making a fourth one, and was even more disappointed when I saw the trailer. I did decide to give this movie a chance, maybe it would surprise me, but it sucked. This movie has no good reason to exist. I find it hard to believe Bonnie would completely ignore Woody while playing with all of Andy's former toys. It feels too forced and is total bullshit that I'm not buying for a second. Also, this movie barely has a plot. It's just a bunch of things happening one after the other, and this movie could have ended much sooner if characters just stuck with the plan. Too often, characters will stop and do things other than what they're supposed to do, so it feels like the movie is dragging ass. Bo Peep returns, and what a coincidence they run into her of all toys, and she gives Woody a new perspective on how toys can find meaning, but this movie has very mixed messages on the subject, as another character has a dilemma that could have added to Bo's message, but it falls back on the message of being loved by kids from the previous movies. Make up your fucking mind, movie! Also, unless you're Woody or Bo Peep, none of Andy or Bonnie's toys have anything to do in this movie, as they spend most of their time waiting in an RV. Buzz is nothing but a comic relief character in this movie, and the new character, Forky, is nothing but a plot device. And fuck this movie's ending. It's the biggest slap in the face of Toy Story 3. While Incredibles 2 was a highly anticipated but disappointing sequel, Toy Story 4 is a severe drop in quality and is a sequel no one asked for. Ranking in at number 13 is Dragon Ball Super: Broly. I know this is technically a 2018 movie, but it was released in America in 2019, so I'm counting it for this list. I already did a really long review for this movie, but here's the short version. This movie continues modern Dragon Ball's track record of relying on nostalgia instead of presenting new ideas, as Toriyama takes a character he didn't even make and rehashes him as his own. But Broly was already rehashed before with Kale. This version of Broly is a very passive character. He has no sense of agency. Paragus and Chili does all the decision making for him, and he doesn't grow as a character. He's just very passive and turns into a big dumb rage monster for Goku and Vegeta to fight. The original Broly from Dragon Ball Z Movie 8 has more going on as a character than DBS Broly does, for crying out loud. Also, the plot, if you want to call it that, is very thin. Frieza goes to Earth to use the Dragon Balls for a wish that sounded stupid in the Red Ribbon Army arc, and sounds even stupider now, and that leads to Broly fighting Goku and Vegeta for 30 minutes straight, which gets very tiresome very quickly, especially since there are no underlying themes or story being told in the fight. Then the fight has a bullshit ending. There was potential for a character study for Broly with Chili and Lemo around, but once the fighting starts, the story comes to a screeching halt. While the animation is an improvement over Battle of Gods and Resurrection F, and there were some really impressive bits of animation overall, there were a lot of really shitty looking scenes as well, and this movie isn't even close to being the best looking Dragon Ball movie as far as I'm concerned. I had already declared I was done with modern Dragon Ball before seeing this, and this movie didn't change my mind in the slightest. Where now within the movies I range from serviceable to decent, and next up at number 12 is Addams Family. The Addams Family is a property I'm very familiar with, and the dark humor of the Addams Family never fails to entertain. That is especially the case for Wednesday Addams, as she is the best character in this movie. This movie's best scenes involve her in some way, and there's never a dull moment when she's around. Wednesday is a total mood, and I love her for it. Christina Ricci would be proud. And even though this movie received criticism for it, I like how the family's designs are based on their designs from the comic books by Charles Addams. There are a lot of callbacks from the Addams Family sitcom, as well as the 90s movies that I liked. However, the designs of anyone not part of the Addams Family are butt ugly. These are some of the worst designs ever. Also, there are some really lame jokes here and there. And there's a plot involving Pugsy Addams going through what is basically the Addams Family version of a bar mitzvah, but the resolution of it isn't something that was built up to or even hinted at, making the resolution very unsatisfying. Also, the main antagonist gets off way too fucking easy. Her comeuppance is basically a slap on the wrist, as it doesn't hurt her too much. While this movie has its good qualities, it's a mess when you put it all together. Coming in at number 11 is Spider-Man Far From Home. I already wasn't the biggest fan of Spider-Man Homecoming, but this movie has done nothing to win me over for this version of Spider-Man. While Tom Holland is a very good actor, the Peter Parker he plays is not very interesting. He's way too heavily influenced by Tony Stark, so he feels more like Iron Man Jr. This version of Spider-Man is not a self-made man like other versions are. During his class trip, he, of all people to choose from in the MCU, is recruited by Nick Fury to stop elemental monsters that have appeared whether he wants to or not. Stepping up as a hero is not something he should be forced into or feel obligated to do. Spider-Man is supposed to do it because he feels it's the right thing to do, and this movie completely fails at that aspect of his character. And not only is there too much Tony Stark influencing Peter, that's also the case for the villain Mysterio. That's 2 Spider-Man movies in a row where Spidey's villains are more so Iron Man villains that Spidey has to deal with for some reason. And Mysterio's villainous reveal is really fucking obvious for anyone with at least a passing knowledge of the character, and his plan makes no fucking sense. While Jake Gyllenhaal is a good actor, the character he plays is not so good. Also, this movie is set after the events of Avengers Endgame, and this movie treats those events as a joke when they should be the furthest thing from being a joke. I'm not saying this movie should have been grim, dark, serious, but it shouldn't have been nearly as lighthearted as it was with all things considered. This movie's action sequences are a major step up from Homecoming, and the illusion sequence Mysterio put Spidey through was very good, but it's not enough. The best Spider-Man content we've gotten in recent years are the likes of the Insomniac Spider-Man game, as well as Into the Spider-Verse, so as far as I'm concerned, the MCU Spider-Man movies are complete misfires. Far From Home could have been worse. It's not really bad at all, but it should have been better. At number 10 is How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World. I really liked the first 2 movies, so I was looking forward to this one, but it's not nearly up to par with its predecessors. Visually, this movie is as good as ever and has a lot of gorgeous environments. Unfortunately, this movie has some continuity issues. Hiccup's father tells them of the stories about the hidden world of dragons and where it's located, but that contradicts him trying to find the dragon's nest in the first movie, because wouldn't he assume the hidden world is the dragon's nest? Also, Grimmel claims he killed all the Night Furies except Toothless, but that flies in the face of what was said in the first movie that, besides Hiccup, no one has ever seen a Night Fury and lived to tell about it. Also, how can Grimmel even confirm he killed them all? The world is a big-ass place. Also, this movie introduces a Light Fury, and Toothless falls for her to the point of choosing her over Hiccup and all of Berk. While this movie portrays this as the citizens of Berk becoming too reliant on dragons, it actually looks more like Toothless is being a jerk to everyone in favor of some dragon he just met. And the conclusion of this movie undoes all the progress that was made in the first two movies, and the explanation behind it is really bullshit. Also, while Grimmel is a step up from the villain from the second movie, he's not particularly anything special himself, and the final battle is anticlimactic compared to the first two movies. This movie has its moments, but it wasn't a very satisfying conclusion to the trilogy, and I haven't been very interested in watching it a second time. Next up at number 9 is Pokemon Detective Pikachu. When I first heard they were making this movie, I was skeptical, but warmed up to it when I saw the trailer. And this movie turned out to be pretty good. I actually saw this movie 3 times in theaters. It being based on the Detective Pikachu game instead of the core series Pokemon games was actually a very good move to test the waters on how a live-action Pokemon movie could work. The core series games would be pretty problematic to make work as live-action movies, but a smaller, self-contained story and setting, like the one in the Detective Pikachu game, works better to make into a movie. Most of the Pokemon themselves look pretty good in this live-action setting, though there are some that don't look so good, but it does do a good job at selling me in this movie's setting of Rhyme City. Also, unlike the Pokemon animated movie series, this movie is accessible to those not familiar with the franchise, as it does a good job of explaining the world of Pokemon, as well as the particular setting of this movie. And Ryan Reynolds is awesome as Detective Pikachu. He'll often remind you of a toned-down version of Deadpool, and oddly enough, that works. And his chemistry with Justice Smith is very good, and this movie isn't afraid to do some very dark humor despite being a kid's movie. However, it doesn't do enough with the premise of this movie. The fact that Tim and Pikachu can use their unique means of communication to get intel from people and Pokemon alike isn't utilized much in this movie, and it really leaves me wanting. Also, uncovering who is really behind the mystery of the plot is way too obvious, as most people figured it out a half hour before the plot twist even occurs. This movie doesn't do enough with its concept, but it's still a fun movie while it lasts, and does make me want to see more live-action Pokemon movies. We're now in the realms of movies I thought were good, and not just pretty good. And at number 8 is Hobbs and Shaw. I wanted to see this in theaters, but never did, so I got this on Blu-ray. This movie is a spin-off of the Fast and Furious series, but the only movie I've seen in this series is Too Fast, Too Furious, so I'm way behind on the series. Despite that, I really enjoyed Hobbs and Shaw. Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham have good on-screen chemistry as their constant moments of shit-talking one another, as well as them trying to one-up each other, led to a lot of funny scenes in this movie. The action set pieces were each very entertaining as well, and there were some creative moments within them. Though this movie is a big dumb action movie, and I think I would have understood a lot of things much better if I were caught up with the other Fast and Furious movies. Although I did understand things enough to understand this movie as its own thing, and maybe watching the other movies will help me appreciate this one more, but I still enjoyed it nonetheless. At lucky number 7 is Alita. Battle Angel. I saw it 3 times in theaters and loved it every time. I also did a review on this movie, so you can check that out to learn my complete thoughts on it. Overall, I was absolutely enamored with Alita herself, as she has to be one of the most endearing characters I've seen in a movie in a long time. She's adorable as hell, and Rosa Salazar's performance is spectacular. The CGI is very good in this movie, and Alita blends in very well and doesn't look out of place despite her large anime eyes. Actually, those eyes make her even more adorable. Also, she is a good example of a strong female character done right. She may kick a lot of ass, but she is a very flawed character with how naive she is. She has moments where she's down, and she doesn't shy away from showing emotion, giving the audience a chance to connect with her. This movie also has very good action sequences that look like they came straight out of an anime, which is very fitting for this movie. But Alita herself carries this movie, as it wouldn't work if she weren't nearly as endearing as she is. The romance between Hugo and herself is very half-baked and unearned. The main antagonist, as well as another major character, both played by major actors, are criminally wasted, and this movie doesn't give Alita a definitive purpose until late in the movie, and there are other subplots that go unresolved, so it sequel baits like hell. Being adapted from a manga, it's very hard to adapt a story from it because you have to take material from several chapters and volumes of manga and condense it into 2 hours of movie, so that really hurt this movie. However, this movie is still very good in spite of everything. Alita is my favorite character from any movie I've seen last year. This movie led to me buying the entire manga series it's based on, and I really hope this movie gets a sequel. At number 6 is John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum. Unfortunately, I missed this movie in theaters, though I did really want to see it, but it was bad timing for me. I had to wait for the Blu-ray to see it, and this movie was very enjoyable. But it wasn't without its issues. Let's start with the positives. First of all, the action sequences were balls to the wall insane. This movie goes from 0 to 100 in no time flat, and the action scenes were fucking awesome. There is a lot of really good fight choreography and camera work on display here, and the action scenes have a lot of variety to them. There are many different locations, environments, and scenarios that help the movie's many action set pieces stand out from one another. However, since this movie is very action-packed for the majority of it, I eventually grew very numb of the action scenes by the time the third act rolled around. Despite the fact that the action scenes were varied, they lost their ability to wow me after a while. Also, John Wick feels too invincible in this movie. He survived some of the craziest shit in this movie that he would have never survived in the first two movies, so he feels less grounded in reality and more reminiscent of 80s action movie stars that can single-handedly take out entire armies while barely getting a scratch. Also, this movie doesn't progress the plot much beyond the ending of John Wick 2. John's situation remains the same, and they're going to make a fourth movie. Something I'm not happy about because I feel these movies can start getting played out by that point. Imagine the crazy escalation in action sequences that would come with another sequel. This movie already escalated things too high, so in another sequel, things would get even more ridiculous. They really should have ended things here, but I will watch the fourth movie when it comes out, and this movie still has enough positives to be good. Stomping in at number 5 is Godzilla, King of the Monsters. I wasn't the biggest fan of Godzilla 2014, as it was boring as shit for the most part, with only the final fight between Godzilla and the Mutos being entertaining. The biggest problem with that movie was the fact that outside Bryan Cranston's character, the human characters were boring, bland, and not even remotely memorable or engaging. Also, that movie kept teasing the kaiju battles until they finally delivered at the very end. King of the Monsters deals with those problems. This movie delivers on the kaiju battles, and they look visually spectacular. There is no shortage of them in this movie, and they get plenty of focus. And while this movie does have moments of focusing on humans, even during kaiju battles, the humans have much more of a sense of purpose here than they did in the previous Godzilla movie. The human characters, while not the best characters ever, are a major step up as far as characters from a Godzilla movie are concerned. Also, Godzilla himself feels much more like a character in this movie instead of a plot device like in the last movie. Here, there is a very clear goal for the human characters and Godzilla, which is restoring the balance being disrupted by King Ghidorah, and they work together to stop him. There were a few nice callbacks to past Godzilla movies as well. And though this movie does have some dumb shit like the humanity is a disease subplot, the kaiju battles and overall improvements over its predecessor makes this movie well worth your time. Okay, we're in the realm of the heavy hitters now, and coming in at number 4 is Zombieland Double Tap. As a huge fan of the first Zombieland movie, I was happy to see the movie finally get a sequel. Taking place, and released, 10 years after the first movie, this movie shows us the gang's shenanigans as they continue to survive a zombie apocalypse, and they've gotten very good at it to the point of being able to identify specific types of zombies, but now there are stronger zombies that raise the stakes. The characters have good chemistry as always, and the new characters introduced are all memorable in their own quirky ways, especially the blonde ditzy girl. However, this movie is structurally similar to the first movie and doesn't do much to elevate itself higher than its predecessor, but it's a good thing the first movie set a really high bar, and even if the sequel doesn't surpass it, it does have the honor of being at least on par with it. At number 3, the honor of the bronze medal goes to Shazam. I originally wasn't going to watch this movie because after watching the shit show that was Justice League, I declared I was done with the DCEU. But I was talked into watching it, and I'm glad I did. This has to be one of the most genuine, heartfelt, feel-good superhero movies I've seen in a long time. It's lighthearted and funny without feeling forced, unlike the way the MCU handles humor most of the time. Shazam really brings out the heart of what makes superheroes so appealing in the first place, and the characters of this movie really bring out that sense of wonder. I also like that Billy Batson doesn't automatically become a true hero once he becomes Shazam, as it allows for a satisfying character arc that both Zachary Levi and Asher Angel play very well. This movie has a lot of dark imagery as well, and isn't afraid to push the PG-13 rating in certain areas. There are also some sad and depressing moments in this movie as well, but this movie juggles the different tones very well and doesn't use humor to undercut it. However, this movie isn't flawless, as there are some bullshit moments involving bullies picking on a handicapped kid, and the final battle goes on for a bit too long for my tastes. But this movie showed me that the DCEU isn't all bad, and has warmed me up to watching more of the series of movies in the future. At number 2, the silver medal goes to Avengers Endgame. After Infinity War, I was hyped as hell to watch this movie, and when I saw it in theaters, I fucking loved it. I love this movie's slow build-up, showing how the events of Infinity War has affected our heroes before going on to the good stuff involving the time heist. And the time heist itself was a very interesting concept, and had many nice callbacks to previous films, and was able to do so without these moments feeling like shameless fan service. I really like the original Avengers members being heavily featured in this movie. With the cast scaled down due to the snap from the previous film, this brought the cast to a more manageable size and allowed for more group dynamics. And one thing I really loved about this film is when plot threads from previous films that hadn't been resolved finally get resolved in this film. And there is one in particular involving Captain America that had my entire theater cheering, myself included. And when we get to the big fight at the end, it was an awe-inspiring moment that was once thought to be impossible to pull off in a live-action movie, but this movie did it, and its conclusion was very satisfying. However, there are some glaring issues. This movie still doesn't do Captain Marvel any favors. The Hulk is handled terribly in this movie. Ant-Man's release from the quantum realm was a huge plot contrivance. There were certain characters who didn't get enough screen time to show how the snap affected them compared to others. And Thanos, while I don't think this movie ruined him, he's still nowhere near as compelling as he was in Infinity War, and is a very two-dimensional character in this movie. Also, the time travel featured in this movie makes things complicated, and when everything is supposedly put back in place at the end, it raises more questions than it answers. I initially thought this movie was the best movie of the year, but it was a movie that I enjoyed a little less and less with each rewatch, to the point that I think its replay value isn't as high as other MCU films like Infinity War or Winter Soldier. However, it's still a very satisfying conclusion to the Infinity Saga of the MCU, and could have still made number 1 if it weren't for this next movie. At number 1, as the best movie of 2019, the gold medal goes to Joker. I wasn't even particularly hyped for this movie, not even when I saw the trailer. I thought this movie could have simply been very hit or miss, but I did go into it with an open mind and gave it a chance. And holy shit! This movie was a very pleasant surprise. This movie was a different take on the Joker and was about his origin story as a mentally disturbed man named Arthur Fleck who progressively turns to a life of crime, and Joaquin Phoenix plays the role spectacularly. His performance is so captivating, it's to the point that you don't see the actor playing the character. You only see the character. This movie really takes you inside the head of Arthur Fleck as you see the various influences that ultimately lead to him becoming the Joker. While you do know from the beginning that he will become the Joker by the end, it's the journey that really matters. As you watch Arthur constantly get brought down and fucked over time and time again, it makes you really hope that something positive will happen to him to keep him from turning to the dark side. But as you see him really come into his own as he becomes the Joker, he really takes you into his world. While the other characters in this movie are rather two-dimensional, it works fine for this movie as it shows the world as Arthur sees it. He is the center of this movie's narrative and appears in every single scene in this movie. This movie is such a breath of fresh air in a time that is very oversaturated with comic book movies. This is a rare film that takes a chance and does something different from the norm, to the point that this movie really doesn't feel like a comic book movie at all. This movie feels like a work of art without feeling like it's up its own ass. It also is its own standalone thing, as opposed to being nothing more than a setup for a larger series of movies. Although this movie isn't 100% flawless, and there are a few questionable moments, this movie is a good example of what filmmakers can do when given creative freedom without the studio interference that has greatly plagued the DCEU. This movie really caught me by surprise, and is a movie that I can say without a doubt is the best movie of 2019. And that's a wrap. So far in 2020, I've seen the likes of Bad Boys for Life, Birds of Prey, and Sonic the Hedgehog, and I'm looking forward to seeing Black Widow, Wonder Woman 84, and Godzilla vs. King Kong, so we'll have to wait and see how 2020's movie ranking will turn out. How would you rank the movies of 2019? Be sure to let me know all your thoughts in the comments. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, and enable all notifications to keep up with all future content. Have a good day, everyone. This is Trace, signing out.